When you think of Buffalo football, you think of the Bills, right? Well, long before them, another team absolutely ruled that city. They were a founding franchise of the NFL, a total powerhouse that dominated the league's messy, chaotic early days. But today, their story and their championship is almost completely forgotten. So we're going to figure out how a team like that just gets erased from history.
Okay, so this is the central mystery we're unpacking. How on earth does a team finish the season undefeated, claim a championship, and still lose it all? It's this incredible story of ambition, pure exhaustion, and a backroom deal that people have been arguing about for over 100 years. It's a controversy so infamous, it actually earned its own nickname, the Staley Swindle.
But before we even get to the swindle, you got to understand just how turbulent this era of football was. I mean, this Buffalo franchise is the perfect example. They had a serious identity crisis. They couldn't even settle on a name. They started out as the Buffalo All-Stars, a local barnstorming team. And what that means is they weren't in some formal league. They just traveled around the Midwest, playing any team that would take them on, building a reputation one game at a time.
Then in 1918, right in the middle of the Spanish flu pandemic, they rebranded as the Niagaras. A lot of the top teams were shutting down for the season, so they saw an opportunity, signed a bunch of players who were suddenly out of work, and just stormed their way to a city championship, completely undefeated.
The very next year, surprise, surprise, another change. They reorganized as the Buffalo Prospects and went on to capture the New York Pro Football League title. You can really see the momentum building here, right? They were getting ready for the national stage.
And that brings us to their most famous identity, the Buffalo All-Americans. This is the name they took when they became a founding member of the brand new American Professional Football Association. Yep, the very same league that would eventually become the NFL we all know today.
And hey, just to complete the picture, their final years were an absolute mess of rebrands. They were the Bisons, then the Rangers, then the Bisons again, before the team finally just folded for good. It just goes to show you how unstable things really were back then. Okay, so forget all those name changes for a minute and let's focus on their peak, because as the All-Americans, this team wasn't just good, they were one of the most dominant forces the league had ever seen. Seriously.
I mean, just look at the consistency here. A state championship in 19, then 2 absolutely incredible seasons in the new National League. Across 3 whole years, they lost only 2 games. This was not a fluke. This was a dynasty in the making.
And the man at the heart of it all was this guy right here, Tommy Hewitt. He was the quarterback, the head coach, and eventually a part owner. So think player, coach, GM all rolled into one. He was the brilliant football mind who was engineering this incredible run.
And this stat really shows you how far ahead of their time they were. Their offense was so electric, they were putting up numbers that wouldn't be matched until Tom Brady's almost perfect 2007 Patriots. That's the kind of powerhouse we're talking about here.
Which, of course, brings us to 1921. The team was at the absolute peak of its powers, on the verge of cementing its legacy. But one fateful decision, a decision made after the regular season had already ended, would change literally everything.
So you have to remember, the season was over. Buffalo had finished without a single loss. By every single measure, they were the champions. They were so sure of it, they actually had these tiny gold footballs made for the players to commemorate the title.
But then, owner Frank McNeil made a truly disastrous call. He agreed to 2 more games, supposedly just for exhibition. The team travels to Akron and wins on a Saturday. Then, with 0 rest, they take an all-night train to Chicago to play the Staleys, who were coached by the legendary George Halas. Exhausted, they lose a nail-biter, and that's when Halas smelled blood in the water and convinced the league to hold a vote.
And this was the argument that stole the championship. It wasn't in any rulebook. It was this flimsy, made-up-on-the-spot justification that the league's executive committee just decided to accept. It was basically the Wild West of professional football, and Buffalo had just been outmaneuvered. This kind of chaos is exactly why the league struggled for legitimacy in its early years.
So the arguments were pretty simple. Buffalo's owner, Frank McNeil, insisted the games were just friendlies. They didn't count. His team had the best record when the official season ended, period. But George Halas, who was a master tactician both on and off the field, claimed the second game was a de facto tiebreaker and pointed to the aggregate score, the combined points from both their games that season. And in the end, Halas's argument won the vote.
And that controversial decision, well, that was the beginning of the end. The franchise never really recovered.
The Staley Swindle didn't just cost them a title. It seemed to just completely break the team's spirit.
And the decline was fast. Their star player coach, Tommy Hewitt, retired in 1924. The team started cycling through names again in this desperate attempt to stay afloat. They even had to suspend operations in the middle of the 1927 season, before one last, futile attempt in 1929.
And just to give you an idea of how bizarre their final years were, in 1926, they brought in a whole squad of players from Texas and rebranded as the Rangers. Well, the experiment failed spectacularly when the Texan players decided they just couldn't handle a Buffalo winter and left. They just packed up and left. It was a sign of a franchise that was completely losing its way.
And so, one of the original pillars of the NFL, a team that was once on the cusp of a dynasty, it just vanished. And its history was almost completely erased right along with it.
This old Bisons logo is one of the last remnants of the team. And think about this. They were one of the longest surviving original NFL franchises, outlasting many of their contemporaries. Yet today, their story is just a footnote, unknown even to most diehard football fans.
And this number, this is maybe the most damning piece of evidence of their forgotten legacy: 0. That's the number of players from the All-Americans, Bisons, or Rangers who are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
I mean, let that sink in for a second. They are the longest surviving NFL team to have 0 players in the Hall of Fame. Their owner, Frank McNeil, went to his grave fighting to get that 1921 decision reversed, but it never was. And just to be crystal clear, they have no official connection to the modern Buffalo Bills. They are truly a ghost franchise.
And that just leaves us with the ultimate question. What if Frank McNeil had never scheduled those 2 games? Could the All-Americans have become an NFL dynasty to rival the Bears and Packers? It's one of football's greatest what-ifs. A story of how one controversial vote might have rewritten the entire history of the league.